intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is 9/11. Where were you 16 years ago? A little bit later this hour, we're going to spend some time talking about that, because you all know where you were 16 years ago if you were alive, and that is because of the attack of 9/11. And, of course, then we saw a rush to churches for a while, an interest in spirituality, but that faded pretty quickly. And so we'll be talking about that later this hour. And, of course, also continue to watch what has been happening there in the state of Florida. Hurricane Irma has now knocked out power to about 5.8 million homes and businesses. We'll talk about some of the devastation and damage. And because it's football season, wondered what was going to happen, especially on this 9/11. There were some that were saying, let's hope that some of these players don't take a knee today. You have a doubleheader tonight. And interestingly enough, the Cleveland Browns, you had a couple of players during preseason that took a knee. But then the team did something, which we'll talk about a little bit later, that I think will be really encouraging to you. So we've got a lot of things to cover. But because of the fact that we have so often talked about technology, I wanted to come to a book that came out a couple of months ago, but we never really scheduled an interview. And I thought it would be very helpful for us as a time when we're watching the television all the time and we're checking our phones because of what has been taking place. I wanted to, first of all, talk a little bit about how to manage that technology. And then in the second hour today, Max Lucado is going to be with us, his new book, Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. But this new book, it's new in the sense that it's out this year, but not new in the sense that it's been out for a number of months, is written by Andy Crouch, called The Tech Wise Family, Everyday Steps to Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. Andy Crouch has been with us many times before. He's an author, speaker, musician, and an individual that we've talked about with his book, Strong and Weak, Playing God, Culture Making, and, of course, this new book, Tech Wise Family. He has served in the past as the executive editor of Christianity Today, and now is actually the senior strategist for communication for the John Templeton Foundation. So, Andy, always great to have you on the program with us.
It's great to be back, Kirby. Thank you very much.
Talk about your recent change, because whenever I introduce you, I always talk about he's with Christianity Today, and now I've got to change the way I introduce you to people. Even when people say, who are you going to have on the program today? We're going to have Andy Crouch, but I guess he's not really with Christianity Today anymore. So what's happened?
Yeah, so sorry to make life more difficult, but it made my life a little simpler. CT is based in Chicago. My family has lived in Philadelphia for all these years I worked for CT, and I was using a lot of technology to get back and forth and had great years with that magazine, but had a chance to work with some friends and an important organization right up the road, the John Templeton Foundation here in Philadelphia. So that is my current assignment, and now instead of flying 2 hours to get to work, I just have to drive about 20 minutes, which actually has been a good thing, along with lots of new opportunities to help with a pretty important mission.
Well, I know they're blessed to have you there. So let's, if we can, talk a little bit about this idea of technology. Your book came out a number of months ago, and we kind of missed getting you on the program then, but I'm glad we have a chance now, because since then, Andy, we've had this Millennial Roundtable. And it's rare that on a Wednesday Millennial Roundtable we don't come back to the issue of technology. And you live in a world where, as you said, you're very high tech. Your wife is a scientist. You have a family that probably would not be described as Anabaptist, culture rejecting, or anything of the sort. So how have you sort of figured this out?
Amish.
Don't look Amish. Yeah. So how have you kind of sorted all of this out? Because this is one of the reasons I know that you wrote the book, because it really is, in a sense, the lessons that you've learned as well.
Yeah, it's the intersection, really, of two things. One is our own family. We realized years ago when our children were small, they're now in their late teen years, that we had to make some very intentional choices about technology, or else the default settings of our world were going to make those choices for us. And the intersection also with just realizing, actually, every time I would speak somewhere and just mention some choice my wife and I had made, like not having a television in the house until the kids were at least 10. We wanted 10 years for them of just screen-free life. Or a decision we just made about smartphones or cell phones or whatever. I would get all these parents, often younger parents, coming up to me afterwards, kind of desperate for help in figuring this out, because we're all living through this massive change in human history, really within one generation. At the beginning of my parents' lifetime, they're in their 70s now, to today, we've added all these devices to our lives. And we really don't have that much wisdom collected from multiple generations or tradition to know how to handle it. So my wife and I have had to try to figure it out. We've had some friends who have made even better choices than us, to be honest, and I tried to compile those in this book, The Tech-Wise Family.
I just mentioned that there are also a number of insights and especially research from the George Barna Group, or the Barna Research Group, I should say now, and that is that one of the things, of course, they ask is, you think parenting is more difficult? And, yeah, a lot of people agreed with that. Why? Well, technology, and they figured that out. And, of course, also the dangerous world, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But these technological challenges are difficult because if a young person wanted to look at pornography, there was a time not so long ago, and since I'm a little bit older than you, I can remember that time in which you'd have to go to a really dangerous part of town, or else you'd have to have somebody's father who had access to that. Now it's just a mouse click away. And if you wanted to try to influence people, bully people, you had to do it face to face, and there was at least the possibility of a respite when you would come home from school. That technology has changed everything, hasn't it?
Well, exactly. You know, technology is almost always sold in terms of how it's going to make our lives easier, and we think easier is better, but the truth is technology makes everything easier. Both good and bad get easier, and the one thing it doesn't make easier is actually making healthy, wise, courageous choices. So these devices that, you know, simplify our family's logistics, let's say, in all kinds of ways. We can keep track of the kids' schedules so much more easily now than, at least I imagine, than my parents. I don't know how they did it. But on the other hand, it's also way more easy for me to be distracted from my kids. It's way easier for kids to get caught up in all kinds of things like what you mentioned. And it's not even just the things that parents are most worried about, which is access to, you know, very inappropriate sexual content or violent content. It's actually even just as simple as getting a good night's sleep. We found that 80% of kids, a little over 80%, sleep with their phones. Those who have phones, and most kids do. And that is just the worst idea in the world for sleep. And that's a very fundamental thing, because if you haven't gotten a good night's sleep, you are more prone to make all kinds of mistakes and bad choices, even more so than we're all tempted to.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. And Chapter 4 there is on waking and sleeping. One of the conversations we've had around this round table before, not only with the Millennial Roundtable, but others as well, and how that affects the sleep, and how many times you might check your phone on an average day, and whether or not you use your phone to wake you up. We had one of our guests around the round table say, I used to use my phone as an alarm clock, and I finally went out and bought an alarm clock and put my phone in the other room. And so, again, there's some very concrete, helpful steps for putting technology in its proper place. And this is a book that I certainly do want to put in your hands. We've made it very easy for you to get a copy of it because we have a link there on our website, pointofview.net. It is entitled The Tech-Wise Family, Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. Andy Crouch with us. Of course, he has written about all sorts of other issues like culture, and this one I think is very appropriate for all of us to have. If you'd like to know a little bit more, go to our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation with Andy right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, even a devastating hurricane can provide some positive lessons. News outlets and commentators have been pointing to so many great feel-good stories of people who stepped up to save people from the floodwaters and provide for them once they were rescued. At least for a short period of time, the racial divisions were set aside as people from different ethnic backgrounds stepped up to help people of various ethnic backgrounds. We didn't know if the people doing the rescuing or the people being rescued voted for or against Donald Trump. We didn't know if they were Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We saw a better side of a divided country. We also saw in this hurricane and flood that some of the politically correct ideas flew right out the window. Ben Shapiro reminded us in one column that in a crisis, men are no longer toxic, women protect children, and children are innocent. He used one of the iconic pictures from the flood to illustrate his point. It was a picture of a man in a baseball cap carrying a woman through the water. The woman, in turn, is holding a baby curled up by her chest. Feminists argue that manhood is toxic and that manhood no longer has meaning. Women don't need protectors, they say. Well, when the floods came, I'm sure many women were glad that men were willing to step up, to be strong, and to be masculine. In the crisis, women were guarding their children, but we're told by our culture that women should be out in the workplace and not define themselves as mothers and homemakers. The mother in this picture was protecting her child, as she was supposed to do. Finally, we're told that children cannot be innocent but must become sophisticated enough to make major decisions. They should be able to decide their standards of education, their standards of morality, and even their sexual standards. In fact, they should be able to decide their own sex. I think that Hurricane Harvey helped clarify some of the false cultural teachings of society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Andy Crouch. The book is entitled The Tech-Wise Family, Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in its Proper Place. Maybe you've already seen it in your local bookstore, and if so, I hope you've purchased a copy. If not, we've made it very easy. It's published by Baker Books, and we gave you a couple facts and figures. I won't overdo it, but 82% of teens, as we mentioned just a minute ago, go to sleep with their phone next to them. You have about 60% of adults that say they never take a break from social media. 4 in 10 parents say electronic devices are a significant disruption to family meals. And on average, parents say their children spend 5 hours using an electronic device on a typical weekday. Which brings me to a key point, Andy, and that is I've said for years that young people spend entirely too much time in front of a screen, whether it's a computer screen or a video screen or a movie screen or the screen of their smartphone. Part of the problem is the parents do as well, and so we need to set a very good role model, don't we?
Totally. One of the real key ideas of this book is it is not just about the kids. It is just as much, in fact, I think in some ways more about what we as adults and parents choose, whether we happen to be parents or not. We're setting an example for younger people. And the reality is, people say, oh, kids spend so much time on their devices. Well, every adult I see in any public place is on their device as well. And, these are very useful things, and we can get work done on them. That can be productive, but they also are tremendously distracting from other people, from the kind of silence and quiet that allows us to actually hear our own thoughts and perhaps hear God speaking into our lives. And just the creativity that we actually need to have as human beings. So we need really to have a rhythm. That statistic about people never taking a break. Yeah. There's a biblical commandment about that called Sabbath, that one day a week we are all meant to take a break from all these things that give us a sense of significance, purpose, productivity. We really need a rhythm of work and rest, and that includes with our devices.
I just mentioned we have a link to andycrouch.com, and you can find that on our website. There's a place where you can learn more and also order the book. You may already have seen it in your bookstore, and if you haven't ordered it or purchased a copy, I would encourage you to do so. Two of your chapters talk about shaping space and structuring time. And it seems to me this gets back to, Andy, the intentionality that you and your wife brought to this whole discussion. So what would you say to parents, especially parents with young children that aren't already addicted to the smartphone? It seems to me that you can begin to craft and guide some of that so it doesn't end up being thermonuclear when you have these discussions.
Exactly. And the most important thing, I think, is to kind of rearrange the furniture of your life, and sometimes literally the furniture, to put the things you most value and that you want your family to most value at the center, literally the center of your house, and the things that are less important at the edges. So for us, that means all the screens and really all the other devices are sort of at the edges of the house. We do have a TV now that our kids are older, and we enjoy watching, a well-chosen movie about once every 6 weeks. We get around to it. We're pretty busy doing other things, but we do turn on that screen from time to time, but it's in the basement. It's not in the central living area. And in fact, in our first floor of our house, where most of the family spends most of the time, we have almost no devices. It's all about creativity. So we had an art table in front of the kind of an arts and crafts table in front of the window that the kids could play and work at when they were small. We have musical instruments. We've got books, but no screens. And I think, just thinking about what do I want to be the first thing I see when I walk into the room, because I'm very likely to pick up that TV remote if it's there, or pick up that iPhone if it's there. And then the other thing is what you mentioned, kind of structuring our time. And this is really the principle of Sabbath. But I would extend it not just one day a week, but 1 hour a day. And then at the other end, I'd say 1 week a year. So 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, one week a year. How about the whole family, very much including the parents and the adults, turns it all off. For us, it's the dinner hour, and it's Sunday, and we're able to take a week of vacation where we turn it all off, and it's amazing what happens to our relationships with each other. It's kind of detox, just this regular pattern of detox from the stimulation we get from all this technology.
Outstanding. A couple other things I want to cover just real quickly before you go. One on boredom, the other on singing. But the good news about boredom, that's something very important, because if you grew up on a farm, you know that you never say I'm bored, because there's always chores to do. But now there is this kind of idea that, well, I'm bored, so I want to turn on my phone, or I want to watch a video or something like that. There's no place for be still and know that I'm God, right?
Oh, exactly. It is really so sad that we think that boredom is a problem to be solved with distraction. Which is kind of like saying hunger is something to be solved with potato chips. Potato chips will make you feel less hungry for a while, but it's actually going to make you feel worse in the long run if that's all you eat. And the good news about boredom, actually, is that creativity is on the other side of boredom, especially for children. I mean, children will protest that they're bored, but if you just refuse to kind of give in and let them settle for shallow entertainment, they will find things to discover. Send them out in the backyard, or somewhere where they can play in 3 dimensions with the organic world, not a glowing rectangle. And actually, you'll be amazed at the creativity that emerges from that. And that's true for adults as well. It's true for me as a writer. I have to have these long pauses where I'm not being distracted, and I do sometimes feel sort of bored and not sure of what's coming next. And then I find consistently God starts to work, my own heart awakens, my imagination awakens, and something good happens on the other side of boredom, but you never find it if you're distracting yourself the whole time.
There's so many people that have lamented the lack of creativity or the loss of creativity. I think part of it is because there's no downtime. There's no think time. There's, the times when, and you and I probably both do a fair amount of writing, not as much as you, but I do write commentaries every day, and I'm always thinking about how to communicate stuff. And the best ideas, and I remember years ago when I taught a group of people that were in advertising and art, most of them said the best ideas came when they were in the shower, when they were shaving, or for the women when they were putting on makeup, or when they were driving, when there was downtime.
How about that?
But in this 24/7 news cycle that all of us are in, I think we've really lost a lot of creativity, haven't we?
Yeah, totally. 24/7, 60, like, down to the second. We've always got something that can occupy us. But think about what happens in those blank spaces. Some of the best ideas of our lives happen in those blank spaces.
Wow. Well, again, anybody looking at a book on TechWise Family would say, okay, a lot of what I would expect would be there until they get to Chapter 9 on why singing matters. Delightful chapter, but let's talk about that for just a minute, because now we don't sing anymore. We watch people sing the Star Spangled Banner or the national anthem. We watch people in front of the church sing. And you talk about that in terms of just, again, this idea of community, and that's something we are losing as well because of technology, aren't we?
It completely is, and it really came, we think of technology as like our smartphones, but this was one of the earliest technologies, recorded music, about 100 years ago, a little more now. And recorded music, I mean, it's a great gift. I don't want to deny that. But what it robbed us of was everybody learning how to make music at some level. And it used to be the case, many of your listeners will remember families that would gather around the piano on a Sunday evening or after dinner, maybe even during the week, and sing together. This does not happen anymore. And, of course, even our schools have stopped teaching how to make music for the most part, or they do it in very little in the early grades and then not at all after that. And so music becomes something that other people do, that a few professionals do. They make these great recordings or these great performances, and we all listen. But we've lost I think it is partly community, and frankly, it's also worship. I travel to a lot of churches in the United States, and I have to tell you, people aren't singing as much as they used to because we have these amazing bands, and they're really well amplified. And, they do the best they can at their job. They're really good at it. The only problem is the people aren't singing anymore, and our kids aren't singing, and especially developing skill on various instruments and with their own voice and body. We're really missing out, and this is something we could change. We could decide in our homes and in our churches, at least start there, that we're going to actually try to make music together and create things together rather than just pressing play.
Well, again, this is a book. It's in a short format, although it has 200 pages. It's a little bit short. It's very easy to read. It's got lots of facts and figures from Barna Research, and it is entitled The TechWise Family, Everyday Steps for Putting Technology in Its Proper Place. We have a link to andycrouch.com. You can order it there. Of course, we also have another link, and of course, I would encourage you to look for it in your bookstore if you haven't seen it there. It's published by Baker Books. And Andy, thank you so very much again for giving us some time, and we very wish you well at the John Templeton Foundation. Look forward to the next opportunity to chat with you.
Thank you. I so appreciate you taking an interest in this particular topic. It's really important.
Thank you so much. Let's take a break. When we come back, by the way, I'll open up the phones. Perhaps this stimulated a question or a comment. You're welcome to join us on that. 1-800-351-1212. But on a day when we've had another hurricane, this one going through Florida, on a day 16 years after 9/11, and on a day where some have wondered whether or not football players would actually stand for the national anthem, I thought it would be good to talk about those issues, and that's what we'll do. Second hour, of course, Max Lucado will be with us. Anxious for Nothing. Excellent book. We'll be back right after this.
At dinner recently, I was struck by the couple in front of me. They were allegedly spending a night out together, but the only time they communicated in a half hour was one time when the man showed what was on his phone to the woman, and then back to their own screens. We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You'll find us online with your phone, your tablet, your laptop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues. You can also follow our new YouTube video series, Uncensored. Stay informed. Follow us on Twitter, at Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Again, at Point of View RTS. We'd love you to retweet us, to share our Facebook posts, but please don't do it when you're out with your family or someone you love. We can wait. We're online 24 hours a day. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Max Lucado will be with us in about a half an hour, so this is an open line now for your comments. Number of things to talk about. First of all, of course, we talked with Andy Crouch about the TechWise family, so if that is something you would like to address, we certainly would love to hear from you. This, of course, is the anniversary of 9/11, September 11th, 2001. If you are over the age of about 20 to 25, you certainly know exactly where you were on that day. And, of course, when the first reports hit, we all remember the concern, first the confusion, and then the harsh reality of the fact that we had been attacked. And so today, of course, we see that President Donald Trump, along with the Defense Secretary James Mattis and Joint Chiefs Chairman Joseph Dunford, actually spoke to America's strength. We have Donald Trump saying the terrorists who attacked us thought they could incite fear and weaken our spirit, but America cannot be intimidated, and those who try will soon join the long list of vanquished enemies who dared to test our mettle. So first of all, he and the First Lady, Melania, actually took for a moment of silence, which was actually dedicated to the time when the first plane hit the North Tower of New York's Twin Towers. Well, at the same period of time, you also have the Vice President Mike Pence, who observed a solemn day in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is the site, of course, where the United Airlines Flight 93 crashed. After that, then Donald Trump went on over to the Pentagon, and there have been a number of remembrances today. So I'd love to get your comments, 1-800-351-1212. And it is interesting because after this took place, first of all, you remember that there was a rush to churches, a number of people trying to find peace and some kind of significance and maybe community that took place here. That faded pretty quickly, but it is interesting that just a week ago, of course, there was this National Day of Prayer that was called by President Donald Trump, and we may want to spend some time talking about that as well. You might remember the great anxiety, and that's why I thought it was so appropriate that in the second hour today, we're going to be talking with Max Lucado about his new book, Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. And in just a minute, we also want to talk about what has been taking place in Florida. As I mentioned just a minute ago, 5.8 million homes and businesses that actually do not have power. We have a number of airports that are closed down. We also have the concern that some people had about the 2 nuclear plants, which are safe. And now, as many of our listeners are in the Georgia area, I think it's up to 13% of these gas stations are simply out of fuel because as the storm has headed north, it is affecting other individuals in the listening area as well. So if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Before this half hour is up, though, I do want to talk a little bit about the NFL players who in the past would not kneel for the national anthem, and that turned around with the Cleveland Browns, but it is a question some people are asking tonight when you have this NFL doubleheader, if indeed there are players that normally would kneel and not actually stand during the national anthem, would they dare to do it on the 16th anniversary of 9/11? So those are some questions we'll address before this hour is up. Let's go first to the state of California. And David, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, well, thank you, Kirby. We had a lot of memories from 9/11. Out here in California, of course, we're 3 hours behind New York. So I woke up and the buildings were already on fire. And the falling of the buildings was what convinced me that something mighty peculiar had happened. But, are you familiar with the concept of Jubilee?
Yes, I am.
Well, yeah, I kind of think that Jubilee is the best solution for what happened on 9/11. If you look at it, that the law of Moses holds true for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, because they all three come from the family of Abraham. And when you start looking at the idea that the money has been so distorted by military spending, by emergency planning, by false spending anyway. It's time that we all had a jubilee, and that not only is going to buy us calm, but it'll also buy us some ability to basically, forget the enmity that pretty much caused some of these problems to begin with. And in fact, out here in California, I work on energy issues, and a lot of people don't realize it, but Enron, which was huge in the news at the time, there was a third building that fell, and that had the Enron documents in it. And so the Enron lawsuits and the Enron criminal prosecutions disappeared when Building 7 fell down. And a lot of people don't realize that the New York office of the CIA fell in 9/11. That same building had the Secret Service. It had the Security Exchange Commission, New York office of it. The Security Exchange Commission, the ticker tape, that went straight into the Security Exchange building, and they kept the records for all of the transactions on Wall Street. And when all of that evidence got crushed into dust in a matter of seconds, a whole lot of crimes disappeared. The evidence lockers of a whole lot of crimes disappeared. So I very much think that not only Jubilee is going to solve things, but it'll also explain, basically, that organized crime had as big a hand in the dropping of those buildings as the security state or the crooked spies.
Yeah,
and
well, Jubilee is kind of your answer. Okay, let's go to South Carolina. We'll go to the Good News Network. Charmin, thank you for calling today.
Say there. I was just reminiscing about this fateful day for me as an educator. I'm a school librarian, and I was in we called it the media retrieval room, where we fed out. I had 8 televisions, and I fed out to the classrooms news feeds, pre-recorded programs from PBS, and so forth. And I had several televisions on different news networks, and I was getting ready to feed out some things to classrooms. So I was just standing there watching, and all of a sudden, it was on the, I guess it was NBC, it just cut away. It said there's been a serious plane accident, is the way they termed it.
Sure.
In New York, and they cut away and showed that, and I went, gosh, that is horrible, that a plane would accidentally hit one of the Twin Towers and fell it, and I'm just going, I hope, I just stopped and prayed and hoped that the people were safe, and that, that everybody, there would be as few casualties as possible. And it was just, I was in that moment of prayer, praying for those people in the plane, in the Twin Towers, when my principal came in. He said, we're not feeding this out, are we? I said, no. I said, this is just bizarre. I said, I'm just standing here watching this, but I was getting ready to do the news feeds, to the classroom. He said, don't. He said, we've been attacked. And I just stood there. I mean, I was just numb. And I said, are you sure? And then they cut away to the plane, in Pennsylvania that crashed. And I just went, oh, my goodness. Well, then my husband called. He's in law enforcement, but he's also National Guard. And little did we know that moment in time would change our future as a family forever, because he was put on immediate response and as a law enforcement official, but then more so as a guardsman. And he was one of the 122nd out of Batesburg, Leesville, was one of the first National Guard troops in Iraq in that dreaded war. Mm-hmm. And my husband was gone 16 months. And it all just rolled. I mean, when I think back on that time period, it was a vicious attack on our country, but I felt it was a vicious attack on my family. I really did. And I told my husband, I said, I just can't believe that this is happening. And he said to me, he said, if we don't fight them there, we will have to fight them in our streets.
That's right.
So I have to go.
Well, I thank him for his
really
service.
Had no choice. Yeah. And then he had to go back to Afghanistan.
Incredible. I have one of the breaks coming up here, but Charmin, thank you for sharing that. And like you said, it changed our lives, but changed yours even more so. And of course, we also salute those individuals who actually died in the plane crashes, as well as those in the Twin Towers and the Pentagon and others. But also we want to remember those who went and fought in Afghanistan, Iraq, or fought terrorism in other places, and we want to honor them today as well. Let's take a break. We'll take some more phone calls right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It all started with a postal worker, a bunch of pigs, and an old-time radio show. But it ended in court. Back in 1937, Wayman Presley, an Illinois postal worker, decided that it would be a good idea to erect a cross on Bald Knob. The fundraising was slow until Ralph Edwards interviewed Presley on the wildly popular radio show This Is Your Life. Myrta Klutz must have heard the show because she soon conceived the idea to raise and sell pigs to finish the construction. Klutz, with the help of Presley, raised $30,000 worth of pork. So there it stood, 111 feet of gleaming white concrete, 1,034 feet above sea level, near the Bald Knob Wilderness. But it turns out not everyone liked it. Robert Sherman didn't, so Sherman did what most don't think to do when they disagree with an inanimate object. He sued the state of Illinois for giving out a grant to help restore the aging monument. But his lawsuit was dismissed. Turns out Sherman didn't have a dog or pig in the fight. Just because someone is a taxpayer is not enough connection to a case to challenge an action by the state. Sherman versus Illinois raises an important point. Just because someone is offended by something religious does not mean a lawsuit will be successful. State officials should remember that next time someone demands they purge religion from public view. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Max Lucado will be with us in the next hour, but I want to take your phone calls right now, so we'll head to KBJS in Texas. Orban, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you, Kirby. I appreciate you taking my call here today. I just wanted to say a little short note about 911. I woke up that morning, and I was actually praying about some things that day, and I picked up a shirt from Times Square Church, and I was just thinking, people need to be praying every day concerning what's coming at us from these terrorists. And if we could dislodge and do something that would be instrumental in causing them to not succeed, we would be in harmony with each other. And I'm a ham radio operator. We get out and spot storms during these storms. I'm over here in Van, Texas. We've had a lot of them, Kenton and Van.
Sure.
So we're out spotting and looking, and we're reporting nationally right to the National Weather Service about what we're seeing. And if they ever think about doing something in coordination, ham radio operators could get together on nets that we form and talk about what's going on and be kind of instrumental in reporting things that they might not find out about, unless we report it.
You guys used to be sort of the eyes and ears. Now, because so many people have cell phones and things like that, we sometimes can find out a lot more. But again, we've always depended on you and appreciate the good work that our ham radio operators do and all the attempts to make sure that you have a backup when we lose power and we lose communication. So appreciate the work that you've done over the years.
Well, very good. Thank you, Kirby. And we'd like to get some of these youngsters that are on their cell phones into the ham radio. That the advantage is a lot of us are hearing. We're on cell phones. You're talking directly to another person. For a ham radio operator, we're talking to each other over nets, and we can get a bigger picture and kind of disperse the information a little bit more accurately that way. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. And let's, if we can, take at least another phone call or two. Head out to California here. Raymond, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Yeah, I had a question about when you said the Muslims hit the Twin Towers, are they the same as the Jihad, ISIS, or how does that work?
That's a good question. I was talking about that in the broadest sense of the term, but I think it is important to have made a distinction between, say, jihadists, those in that case were Al-Qaeda. Of course, more recently we've had what's called the Islamic State or ISIS. And so, again, I am talking about the fact that they were Muslim. It's true that not all Muslims are terrorists, but virtually all terrorists are Muslims. So, again, you have to kind of put the circles together. But that's one of the questions that a lot of people have been asking lately, and that is, how true were these ideas that were held by the 9/11 hijackers, the ideals that were held by Osama bin Laden, the ideals that are now promoted by the Islamic State and ISIS and Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who has been the caliph who heads up ISIS. And in some respects, the difficulty we've talked about on this program many times before for the moderate Muslims, those who are not jihadists, those who do not believe in terrorism, is that they have to sort of reinterpret the Quran, because there are quite a number of verses in the Quran that have what are called verses of the sword that actually talk about terrorism and call for an armed insurrection, an armed conflict with the pagans and the infidels. And so this, I think, is always going to be a challenge. But if nothing else, I think we want to make sure that we don't always say that all Muslims are terrorists. But sadly, we've come to find out that most all terrorists are indeed Muslims. So appreciate that question, Raymond. It was a good one, and it will get us into a conversation we'll probably have again in the future. But just before the break, I wanted to address one other issue that I've mentioned. Because it is 9/11, there have been some that have wondered if tonight, or even on a Sunday night, but it didn't happen with the Cowboys game, but certainly tonight, you have two NFL games. And in the past, you've had some of the players on some teams that have decided not to stand during the national anthem. And so the former coach of the Chicago Bears, Mike Ditka, made it very clear that he said he was not impressed by the idea of somebody kneeling during the national anthem on the 16th anniversary of 9/11. He said, I'd like to see it put on hold every day. I mean, there's a time and place for everything. Before a football game is not in a time or place for it, period. But he was certainly concerned about what would happen tonight. And I'm hoping that some of the players that had thought about this would look at what was done yesterday with the Cleveland Browns. Because 4 weeks ago, you had a group of Cleveland Browns players that took a knee during the national anthem. And this was in part to kind of support Colin Kaepernick, because he had started this originally because he was concerned about racism. And so what happened a week after that protest is the former Hall of Fame running back for the Cleveland Browns, Jim Brown, actually came and spoke, and he criticized the Cleveland Brown players and Colin Kaepernick. He said Colin has to make up his mind whether he's truly an activist or whether he's a football player. I'm going to give you the real deal. This is, again, Jim Brown saying, I'm an American. I don't desecrate my flag and my national anthem. I'm not going to do anything against the flag and the national anthem. I'm going to work within those situations, but this is my country. I'll work out the problems, but I'll do it in an intelligent manner. So yesterday, the Browns organization took the step even further, and that is that ahead of their game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Cleveland Browns took the field flanked by police, U.S. military personnel, and first responders, and they held arms and locked arms with one another. And this, I thought, was just a very significant event. So, again, we're going to give a 3 cheers award, if you will, from Point of View to the Cleveland Browns, who not only decided to stand during the national anthem, but then to lock arms with various people in law enforcement, to lock arms with various people that were part of the military, and to lock arms with the first responders. So if you haven't had a chance to see that, I suspect you can go to YouTube and actually see it. We might even think about trying to figure out if we could post it on our Facebook page or somewhere else. But I just thought that it was another very significant way in the midst of the need for us to, on many occasions, honor those individuals who, while we are running away from danger, they're running into danger. And there is no doubt that the so many firefighters, law enforcement, and other first responders who were killed in large part because instead of running away from the Twin Towers, ran into the Twin Towers. And so we certainly want to honor them as well. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, certainly also want to honor those who have fought in the military, whether they have given the ultimate sacrifice and have died, and we want to honor them through those of you listening who are the friends, neighbors, coworkers, and family members of them, but also to honor those of you that have served in the military. We'll never be able to thank you enough. So on this 16th anniversary of 9/11, just wanted to take that time to mention that. We can watch the football games tonight and see if anybody takes a knee or whether or not they take their lesson from the Cleveland Browns. And again, 3 cheers for what they did yesterday. Let's take a break. When we come back, we certainly do want to continue to pray for those who have been devastated by Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and maybe even some other storms that have taken place. So again, we will continue to talk about ways in which we can honor them, help them, and minister to them. But when we come back, anxiety in the air. That's why I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to get our good friend Max Lucado in to talk about his new book, Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. So we'll take a break. If you'd like to know more about the book we talked about with Andy Crouch or the book we'll be talking about with Max Lucado, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Well, as we've been talking about, we have a privilege now to talk with our good friend Max Lucado, best-selling author. 125 million products in print that have Max Lucado's name on it. And we're going to be talking about this issue of anxiety. The new book is called Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. This is certainly a chaotic world. It is a time in which many people are stressed out and anxious. So this is going to be something that may be helping you find calm in this chaotic world. And Max Lucado, always great to have you on the program with us.
Oh, it's my privilege, Kirby. I hope you're doing okay.
I'm doing well. And even though we are talking about, the 16th anniversary of 9/11, we're still also talking about the fact that there are all sorts of other reasons to be anxious, whether it's hurricanes in Texas or Florida, or it's just the busy day-to-day living. There are just a lot of people that are struggling with this issue of anxiety. And I know that's why you wrote the book.
It's really an unusual season, isn't it, in which we find ourselves? Hurricanes in Texas and Florida. I believe there was an earthquake in Mexico over the weekend.
Yes.
Wildfires on the West Coast. And then again, as you pointed out, you don't have to, experience Harvey or Irma to have a hurricane. A doctor's report will do just fine, or the death of a loved one, or some financial calamity. It's impossible to make it through life without having to face personal hurricanes.
Well, and also just the busy, frenetic lifestyle. You talk early on about the word holy, which is the Hawaiian word for no breath. And that's because the Hawaiians, when they saw the people coming from Europe or America, wherever it might be, but mostly European immigrants, they're just always running around and everything, and they always seem short of breath. Well, if that was true back in the middle of the 19th century, how much more true is that today in the 21st century?
Isn't that the case? And the reason I was talking about that is because I was trying to figure out how in the world the United States came to be recognized as the most anxious nation on the planet. You'd think that with all of our technologies, with all of our advancements, with all of our medical discoveries, even with so many technological advances, that we would finally come to a place where we could slow down, be calm, and be peaceful. But actually, studies have shown that citizens in developing nations, third world countries, have a higher level of peace and tranquility than we do here in the United States.
Isn't that something? Well, again, this is why this is such an important book. And when you're talking about anxiety, you're talking about kind of a low-grade fear, a trepidation. Yes. Explain what that kind of means, because that's important to the whole discussion we're going to have today.
Right, yeah. I try to differentiate between fear and anxiety. I say they're cousins, but they're not twins. Fear is a necessary and valuable part of life. Fear is that home alarm that goes off when an intruder comes in. Fear is what keeps us from stepping out into busy traffic. Fear is what keeps us from running into a fire. We sense danger, and our body, really our brain, is equipped with a God-given gift. Neurologists tell me it's called the amygdala. It's a little part of our brain, a little walnut-sized part of the brain that senses danger and kicks our body into response mode. Well, that's great. Because of it, I can outrun the bear. Because of it, I'll step back from the rattlesnake. It saves me. So it serves its purpose. It serves like a house alarm. But you don't want a house alarm that goes off every 5 minutes, right? You don't want a house alarm that goes off just at the rustling of the leaves. Well, that's what anxiety is. Anxiety is an amygdala with a twitchy trigger finger. It just jumps all the time. It lives life on edge. It's expecting that there's a bad news around every corner. It's a view of life that says that something bad is going to happen and it's about to happen to me. Well, this is the state of life that I think creates a sense of dread, a sense of trepidation. This state of life also has terrible physical ramifications. One of my friends, a physician, I said, well, tell me the number of physical ailments that are a direct result of anxiety. And he said, well, just go over to any library and pick up a book of all the medical ailments, and you'll find the list. That may have been an overstatement, but most people in the medical world say it's just stunning to them how many of our illnesses trace their root cause back to anxiety. So we could talk a lot about the consequences of anxiety. I don't think most people have to be convinced, though, anxiety is not a good thing. What they're wanting is some type of cure and some help for it.
That's for sure. The book is published by Thomas Nelson. We have information about it on the website. And again, you can find it in your local bookstore because so many of the Max Lucado books are there. Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. One more question that sort of relates to the issue of anxiety. You say anxiety is not a sin, it is an emotion. You shouldn't be anxious about feeling anxious. Unfortunately, people are, right?
Yeah, and we Christians kind of beat ourselves up, right? Because we want to be cheerful. We want to be peaceful, and when we don't, we feel bad about being anxious. And so I think the really proper understanding of anxiety says, it's an emotion. It's not a sin. It's neither right or wrong. It's like grief or happiness. It's just an emotion. Now that emotion can cause us to step into some sinful behavior. Some behavior that brings pain to others and pain to ourselves. If we try to treat anxiety with addictive behavior with drugs or with alcohol, or we lash out at people, or even if we withdraw and refuse to be the kind of parent we need to be or spouse we need to be, then anxiety is causing us to behave in a way that's disrespectful of God. And so, but don't beat yourself up if you feel anxiety. The presence of anxiety is not a sin. And the key is learning to get a hold of anxiety before anxiety gets a hold of you. And that's why I think that the teachings, especially in the book of Philippians, are so helpful, so practical in helping us respond when anxiety surfaces.
Well, you're talking about that. You point out that the Bible is Kindle's most highlighted book. No surprise there. And Philippians 4, verses 6 and 7 are the most highlighted passage. So that's certainly one of the things we're going to be talking about. When we come back, let's talk about some of the prescriptions. And I might just mention as we're going to the break that this would be not only a good book for you, but a great book for a non-believer. And the reason I say that is years ago, before I did this program, I oftentimes spoke on college campuses, giving a Christian perspective in a secular university. One of the speakers offered a list of topics, and one of those was biblical therapy for anxiety. I remember looking at that and thinking, oh, yeah, everybody on a secular university is going to want to have to know what the Bible has to say about anything, including what the Bible has to say about anxiety. You know what? That was a very popular topic. There were lots of people that really wanted to know, what did the Bible have to say about anxiety? So this is an issue that not only can be something that you as a Christian can benefit from in terms of your Christian walk. This, I think, is a real bridge builder, and it's because almost everybody I run into is anxious, and oftentimes those who do not have Christ in their life are very anxious, so this might be a great book in that regard as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Max Lucado. The new book is entitled Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, even a devastating hurricane can provide some positive lessons. News outlets and commentators have been pointing to so many great feel-good stories of people who stepped up to save people from the floodwaters and provide for them once they were rescued. At least for a short period of time, the racial divisions were set aside as people from different ethnic backgrounds stepped up to help people of various ethnic backgrounds. We didn't know if the people doing the rescuing or the people being rescued voted for or against Donald Trump. We didn't know if they were Republican, Democrat, or Independent. We saw a better side of a divided country. We also saw in this hurricane and flood that some of the politically correct ideas flew right out the window. Ben Shapiro reminded us in one column that in a crisis, men are no longer toxic, women protect children, and children are innocent. He used one of the iconic pictures from the flood to illustrate his point. It was a picture of a man in a baseball cap carrying a woman through the water. The woman, in turn, is holding a baby curled up by her chest. Feminists argue that manhood is toxic and that manhood no longer has meaning. Women don't need protectors, they say. Well, when the floods came, I'm sure many women were glad that men were willing to step up, to be strong, and to be masculine. In the crisis, women were guarding their children. But we're told by our culture that women should be out in the workplace and not to find themselves as mothers and homemakers. The mother in this picture was protecting her child as she was supposed to do. Finally, we're told that children cannot be innocent but must become sophisticated enough to make major decisions. They should be able to decide their standards of education, their standards of morality, and even their sexual standards. In fact, they should be able to decide their own sex. I think that Hurricane Harvey helped clarify some of the false cultural teachings of society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Max Lucado. He is the author of the book Anxious for Nothing, as well as many other books. We have a link to maxlucado.com. Of course, you can get the book there. Of course, you can find it in your local bookstore as well. Subtitle, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. And one of the things that you do, Max, is use the acronym CALM, C-A-L-M, as a way to address this issue of anxiety. So I might encourage our listeners to number 1 to 4, C-A-L-M. Let's talk about, indeed, how we can begin to use that acronym in a way that would help us begin to deal with this issue of anxiety in our lives.
Well, before the break, you pointed out that this passage in the book of Philippians is the most underlined book in the Bible, according to Kindle, which tells me a lot of us could use some help when it comes to anxiety. And it really is the Apostle Paul's prescription for anxiety. It's found in the book of Philippians, in the 4th chapter. And I like to begin with the phrase, rejoice in the Lord always, in verse 4. Because there he begins to remind us that really the way to deal with anxiety is to rejoice in the Lord. Now, keep in mind that the Apostle Paul, when he was writing this, was in a prison. It's not like he was sitting on a Jamaican beach, about to sip on a Mai Tai or sit under an umbrella. He was in a very stressful situation. So how was he coping with his stress? Well, I believe he was reminding us that he rejoiced in the Lord. He rejoiced in the Lord's sovereignty, rejoiced in the Lord's mercy, rejoiced in the Lord's presence. You just fill in the blank. But most of all, he rejoiced in the Lord. And then he said, let your gentleness be made evident to all because the Lord is near. And so I think the first thing we do is we celebrate God. The minute my heart feels anxious, I just celebrate God. Then I do the second thing Paul tells me to do. He said, let your be anxious for nothing, But in everything, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God with thanksgiving. So there's my next thing. I simply ask the Lord for help. And I talk about in the book the importance of specific requests. I think that's what a petition is. It's a specific request. We ask the Lord for help in this particular matter. And then we leave it with him, with thanksgiving. We're happy. We're going to say, Lord, I'm going to leave this with you. And we take our anxiety and replace it with gratitude and say, thank you, Lord, that you're involved in this, you're engaged in this, you're going to go ahead of me. We begin to worship the Father. And then we meditate on good things. And knowing that our brain is suddenly free from all the anxiety, the Apostle Paul gives us a list of several things to meditate on, whatever is good, whatever is just, whatever is noble. He gives us a long list of things. I have trouble remembering that list sometimes, so I just try to think about Jesus because I believe he is all of those. So those are the 4 steps, I think, to help us deal with anxiety. We celebrate God, we ask God for help, we leave the problem with him, and we meditate on good things. CALM.
So very good. When we're talking about celebrating God's goodness, we might go into that a little more detail because, again, you talk about the need for us to remember. And if you think about it, all through the scriptures, especially the Old Testament, it talks time and time again to remember. And so when we're rejoicing in the Lord, sometimes it's remembering his goodness, his faithfulness. It is those other times in which maybe we were anxious, but he sustained us in the midst of that. It seems that is a very important aspect of that rejoicing and celebrating of God's goodness, isn't it?
You know, Kirby, I'm an old man now. I don't know if you knew that.
And I think I'm older than you, so that makes me really old.
I'm 62, and I've noticed something as I get older, and more and more of my friends are getting older. I've seen a common trait among happy elderly people, and that is they have a long list of memories of how God has delivered them. And you get them talking and about their lives, and it just seems like they can give you one victory after another. You know,
wow!
I was in financial trouble, but the Lord delivered me. Or I didn't have a job, but the Lord delivered me. Or we went through some marriage issues, but the Lord delivered me. On the other hand, I've gotten to observe that some people who are sour and cranky, they don't have a very good memory.
Mm-hmm.
All they can remember are the bad times or all the problems. And I think you're making a great point there, Kirby, and that is that to rejoice in the Lord is to rejoice in the Lord's track record in your life. And so you'd think that the older we got, the more peaceful we would be, and I think we should be. I think the older we get, the more reason we have to be peaceful. And we begin that as we're young, understanding and inviting the Lord to come in and help us deal with the problems. And we create a catalog, a long list of we're like the psalmist who said, remember the Lord's benefits. We just remember them. And I think that as a result, we have reason to be peaceful because God has gotten us through these kind of things before.
Again, C for celebrate God's goodness. The other one, A, ask God for help. And you have a very helpful chapter on prayer. I mean, I know you've written about that before. It's not the first time you've covered some of this, but you talk about the importance of what you call specific prayer. You say specific prayer is a serious prayer. Specific prayer is an opportunity for us to see God at work. A specific prayer creates a lighter load. It seems to me, and I will be the first to admit this in my own life, my prayer is pretty general. It isn't as specific as you talk about there. So talk about how that can help us with this issue of anxiety.
Well, and I'd like for my prayers to be more specific as well, Kirby. I'm learning this. I think there's our God is a father, of course, and so there's no punishment in offering general prayers. But don't we as fathers love it when our children come to us and they say, Dad, I cannot solve this problem on this page in this math assignment.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can say, okay, let's work on that together. Sometimes our kids come to us and they say, I'm having trouble at school. Well, of course, we're going to help them then. But the more practical help happens when we offer specific prayers. The example of Mary at the wineless wedding comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
The mother of Jesus, she came to him and said, it was a very simple prayer. They have no more wine. I mean, it was pretty specific. And it created an opportunity for one of the most interesting dialogues in the whole Bible. But it ended up with the water becoming wine. But Mary came with a specific request. She didn't come wringing her hands and saying, oh, the world is, going over the edge, a great crisis, a bunch of crazy people. She just said, here's a problem. And she wasn't anxious about it, but she took the problem and she left it with Christ. So I encourage people to do that. Just as you look into your day, what specific challenges do you think you'll face? It's one thing to say, Lord, please be with me today. But I think it's even more powerful to say, Lord, I have an appointment at 2:30 with a particular client, and he and I don't always get along, or she and I often cross swords, and could you help me to be more patient? Could we be and get specific about it? And then when you go into that 2:30 appointment, you will remember and say, oh, wait, I gave this to the Lord. There's no reason for me to be anxious about it. And then when you come out on the end of it and things are better, you'll say, look at that. God did it. Lord, I give you the praise. And so it's a good relationship-building exercise as well as alleviating yourself from unnecessary anxiety.
Also, you talk about take your problem to Christ and tell him you said you would help. And you use some examples. You said you would walk me through the waters, Isaiah 43:2. You said that you would lead me through the valley, of course, Psalm 23. You said you would never leave or forsake me, Hebrews 13. And so in some respects, looking at that promise is another aspect of that as well. And so we'll come back and finish this off. We will only have a few more minutes with Max Lucado, but in case you haven't written these down, CALM stands C for celebrate, A is for ask, L is for leave, which we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Leave your concerns with him. And M is for meditate. And we'll talk about a few more aspects of that in this excellent book, Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. It is written by Max Lucado. We also have a link to his website, and I would certainly encourage you to take the time to find out a little bit more about some of the other books that he has written. And again, you can learn a little bit more as you read through this about how to celebrate God's goodness, how to ask God for help. And we've been talking about this idea of prayer and petitions and requests, then how to leave your concerns with him with thanksgiving, and then how to meditate on good things. And so those are a couple of resources that we wanted to leave with you today. Most importantly, I really do encourage you to get a copy of the book. It is over about 200 pages. Published again by Thomas Nelson. You should find it in your local bookstore, but we have a place for you to order it as well online. And so we'll come back and continue our conversation on this issue of anxiety, something which is a common disorder in America. It is something that we Christians deal with, but as I shared with you just a few minutes ago, I think this would be something that would also give you an opportunity to reach out to those around you who do not know Christ, who do not have the peace that passes all understanding. And this is a book that I think could really start that conversation. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation with our good friend, Max Lucado, right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants his best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Max Lucado for a few more minutes. His book is entitled Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. And if you just joined us, we've been talking about the acronym, which is called CALM, Celebrate, Ask, Leave, and Meditate. And the third one is this idea of leave your concerns with him, with thanksgiving is really the idea. And Max, you talk about the fact that the widest river in the world is actually the if only river. If only I were thinner, I'd have a good life. If only I were richer, I'd have the good life. If only the kids would come. If only the kids were gone. If only I could leave home. If only I could move home. On and on and on. We need to develop, if we're going to really get rid of anxiety, an attitude of gratitude. Don't we need to do that?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And here's what I've learned. I'm a pastor of a church in San Antonio, and I don't do very much counseling, not as much as I used to, but on occasion I found myself visiting with somebody who's really battling anxiety. And I'm often asked two questions. And one of them will feel like a rabbit trail, but I feel like I need to say it. Well, I'm often asked, is it okay for me to use medicine to treat my anxiety? And I always urge people, I say, don't feel guilty if God is using some medicine to help you stabilize your emotions or stabilize even the chemical in your brain. Just trust the Lord and pray, and especially turn to the physician like you would a pastor. And if he recommends that you for a time use medicine to get balanced again, go ahead. But then the second thing I urge them to do, I say, now let's make a list of our blessings. They always look at me funny, like,
yes.
Wait, I'm here to talk about anxiety. I say, no, let's make a list of our blessings. And so sometimes, Kirby, it takes a while to get people out of that funk, out of the cesspool of negativism. But get them going, and I'll say, let's make a list of 10 things that are going right for you. And so we'll make a list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It has to do with health, maybe a good spouse, or maybe a good job. And pretty soon you can almost see a physical difference in this person. They'll come into the office with their shoulders slumped and their countenance sad, but then their shoulders begin to lift and their face begins to lift.
Mm-hmm.
And after they get that number 10, I'll say, now, where's your anxiety? And they'll say, it's gone. It's gone. And I say, it's that simple. It's that simple. For most of us, 95% of us, I would say, we don't need a counselor. We don't need a physician's help. We just need more gratitude. Gratitude releases a certain level of joy into our life. And I like to say it this way, that anxiety and gratitude refuse to share the same heart.
Well said.
And gratitude always wins. So when gratitude shows up, anxiety goes out the back door.
Very good. So again, C for celebrate God's goodness, A for ask God for help, L, leave your concerns with him, and that's thanksgiving and gratitude. Then M, meditate on good things. And again, this is something that you talk about, because think about what you think about. The problem is not your problem, but the way you see it. Sometimes just changing your point of view, changing your viewpoint, your perspective, is really very key in dealing with this issue of anxiety, isn't it?
Yes, sir, it really is. And we tend to forget that we don't have to think about everything that comes into our mind. Just because a thought comes into our mind doesn't mean that we have to give it a place to stay. Just because anxious thoughts knock at the door, that doesn't mean that we have to meditate on the mess. What we can do is what the psalmist did, for example. In Psalm 121:1, he says, I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From whence comes my help? My help comes from the Lord who made the heavens and the earth. I see intentionality in those words. I will lift up my eyes. So I encourage people, don't meditate on the mess. You don't gain anything by setting your eyes on the problem, but you gain everything by meditating on what is good, what is true, what is holy, what is right. The Apostle Paul gives us a long list, and I'm always having trouble remembering all the items on that list. So I just think about Jesus, because I know he is all those virtues.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than, focus on the mess, lift up your eyes, think about the good things, think about how good God is. And I think you'll be surprised how how that anxiety begins to disappear.
Just for a minute, since you are a pastor and want to give you an opportunity to speak to fellow pastors and Bible fellowship leaders and Sunday school leaders and small group leaders, you have about 50 pages in this book called Questions for Reflection. Now, I would say that any of our listeners could go through this book and actually use those resources in the back on their own. But I also know that a lot of people might be thinking this would be maybe a good series to go through in our Sunday school class, in our church, in my small group. How could they use some of these resources in that way?
I think this is an excellent topic. I would imagine that it's always good to study the topic of anxiety, but in this day and age in which we find ourselves truly qualifying as the most anxious nation on the planet, and Christians certainly find themselves battling with anxiety, I believe we owe it to ourselves to help us discover the Lord who is our shepherd, who will lead us and who will calm our fears. And so this tool in the back of the book just has questions that people can ask in a group or use in a class. We have a video curriculum that people can access through the publisher if they'd rather me do the teaching. But I do encourage pastors quite often to lead their church. I find myself, I'm, 33 years at our church. No, wait, 30 years at our church, but been in ministry for 40 years, almost as long as you've been in your ministry, Kirby, but not quite. But you find yourself circling back to similar themes. I think the Lord has placed a unique call on your heart to help us come to a clear understanding, especially of apologetics and living in a culture that's counter-Christian. I feel like the call on my heart is to tell people God loves them and that God will help them get through hard times. And so I keep circling back to messages like this and messages out of the 23rd Psalm, messages about the tenderness of Christ, just because we live in a rough and tumble world. And I believe God wants to create a pocket of people in the middle of this hard world that are tender toward one another and who are tender toward God.
Wow. Just before I let you go, one of your chapters talks about the importance of clinging to Christ and choosing the tranquilla tree over the anxiety tree. And it seems to me that that's really another important choice that we need to make if we're going to deal with this issue of anxiety.
Well, it is. And, that's probably an unnecessary little twist of phrase, but we preachers, are always trying to find something that's
good.
Sick.
Yeah.
And so the anxiety tree is where many people find themselves dangling from the limb of anxiety, but there is a tranquilla tree as well, and it's an option. Kirby, I would simply urge our people to remember it's a choice. You don't have to live with a life that is marked by anxiety. Yes, anxiety is going to come. It's knocked on my door today, but anxiety is dealt with by making 1,001 daily decisions to trust the Lord day by day, minute by minute. Don't beat yourself up for having anxiety in your life, but just don't have anxiety over for dinner. Show at the door and turn to Christ. Be careful to give all your problems to Him, and He will bring peace into your life.
Well, again, the book is entitled Anxious for Nothing, Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. And we have a link to your website. And again, if people want to find out a little bit more about this book, or if they want to contact the publisher, Thomas Nelson, about some of the DVDs and videos and things like that, those are all available through those various websites, aren't they?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Well, it's just always a delight to have you on the program. I want to just say thank you again for the friendship that we've had over these years, and thank you so very much for, as always, joining us here on Point of View.
By all means, and all the best to you, and may the Lord bless you and sustain you and give you many, many more years of fruitful ministry.
Again, we have a link to Max Lucado's website, to his Twitter account and Facebook account. And so let's, again, let him go. And he's going on to a video shoot. But I wanted to just give you a chance to hear a little bit more about this book, Anxious for Nothing. It's kind of a low-grade fear. It's an edginess. It's a fear and trepidation that we face so often. And so we really wanted to take you back to some key verses, and those are very simple, in Philippians 4, verses 4 through 8. Again, we use the acronym CALM, celebrate God's goodness. A, ask God for help. L, leave your concerns with him, with thanksgiving. And then M, meditate on good things. And I think you will benefit from this book. And let me also recommend those of you that are in positions of leadership. Perhaps you're a pastor, perhaps you're a Sunday school leader, a Bible fellowship leader, Sunday school leader. You might find this as a wonderful way to begin to address a very common disorder here in America, and that is the issue of anxiety. And so, again, take the time to find out about this book. It is now out, published by Thomas Nelson, 200 pages. Like I said, about 50 of those pages are material in the back for meditation, which you can use individually or you could use in your Sunday school class as well. Let's take a break. I've got a few final comments before this day is over, and we certainly do encourage you to visit the website and find out more. All available, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It all started with a postal worker, a bunch of pigs, and an old-time radio show. But it ended in court. Back in 1937, Wayman Presley, an Illinois postal worker, decided that it would be a good idea to erect a cross on Bald Knob. The fundraising was slow until Ralph Edwards interviewed Presley on the wildly popular radio show This Is Your Life. Myrta Klutz must have heard the show because she soon conceived the idea to raise and sell pigs to finish the construction. Klutz, with the help of Presley, raised $30,000 worth of pork. So there it stood, 111 feet of gleaming white concrete, 1,034 feet above sea level, near the Bald Knob Wilderness. But it turns out not everyone liked it. Robert Sherman didn't, so Sherman did what most don't think to do when they disagree with an inanimate object. He sued the state of Illinois for giving out a grant to help restore the aging monument. But his lawsuit was dismissed. Turns out Sherman didn't have a dog or pig in the fight. Just because someone is a taxpayer is not enough connection to a case to challenge an action by the state. Sherman versus Illinois raises an important point. Just because someone is offended by something religious does not mean a lawsuit will be successful. State officials should remember that next time someone demands they purge religion from public view. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Learn more and request a free In God We Trust window cling at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org and get your free In God We Trust window cling.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us once again, we'll open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. Talked with Max Lucado. He had to head on to his next activity, but this issue of anxiety is very important because anxiety disorders are still a very significant issue in America. If you put them all under the category of anxiety disorders, then they are the number one mental health problem among women, and second only to alcohol and drug abuse among men. So they're in the top two for both men and women. Then, of course, we talked a little bit about how you wouldn't expect it, but the United States is the most anxious nation in the world if you use the kind of surveys that have been used. And stress-related ailments of some sort cost the nation about $300 billion. So let's recognize that some of this is due to various kinds of medical issues. And so, again, we've seen that Americans have more than doubled their spending on anti-anxiety medications like Xanax and Valium, from about $900 million to about $2.1 billion, I guess, is where the number is right now. So obviously there is a medical component, but as what he was trying to help us understand today is there's also kind of a psychological and spiritual component, and that's why I appreciated so much him taking us back to a key verse, or a series of verses, I guess we should say, since he covered actually verses 4 through 8 in Philippians 4, and really in the subtitle of the book, Finding Calm, C-A-L-M, in a Chaotic World. This is, I think, a very good step for you to remember that the C-A-L-M stands for 3 or 4 very important things. The C, of course, is for celebrate God's goodness. The A for ask God for help. The L, leave your concerns with him. And the M for meditate on good things. So that's one of the reasons we covered that here today. Again, we don't want to forget that this is the 16th anniversary of the 9/11 attack on America. And because of those attacks, we certainly still have etched in our minds some of those images that are still the iconic images of what has taken place, and a reminder of the fact that there are evil people in the world, and there are those jihadists and terrorists that want to destroy us. So certainly that is one of the reasons why on this day we wanted to honor that, at least in part, and certainly honor those who lost their lives then and have lost their lives since then in the pursuit of freedom for us and to protect us and to keep us safe. We also want to remember those who are struggling right now. It almost, sometimes you can almost feel guilty. We go out and there's sunshine and there's plenty, and we recognize that still there are many people that have not and are not going to be moving into their homes anytime soon in Houston. There are about 6 million homes and businesses without power in Florida. And now other areas of the country, like Georgia, are being affected as well. We are certainly gratified that even though there could have been more destruction, there wasn't as much as many people feared. The nuclear plants are safe. The airports are closed at the moment, but they will reopen. And we may be back to normal a lot faster in Florida than we'll be in, say, Texas and Louisiana. So we'll see how that plays out as well. Just before we go, one of the articles I posted today, which we will not get to in any significant way, but I wanted to leave it for you to read and to think about, and that is the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, has changed some of the rulemaking that was implemented under the Obama administration. And to put it simply, she has recognized, and I think a lot of us around the table recognize, that the way these rules were initiated during the Obama administration, young men who were involved with any kind of accusation against them of sexual assault were in most cases assumed to be guilty unless they could prove their innocence. That may be a slight overstatement, but just barely. And so I posted this piece by David French in which he said, honestly, he said, even for a person who's been hardened by decades of campus ideological and legal battles, it's hard to believe how thoroughly unhinged, how intellectually bankrupt is the argument against protecting due process on campus. If you're not familiar, David French used to be a lawyer who dealt with a lot of the abuses on college campuses. So he sort of cut his teeth there. And he points out that Education Secretary Betsy DeVos announced that the Trump administration would shortly begin a regulatory rulemaking process designed to protect college students from sexual assault, while also protecting the fundamental constitutional rights of the accused. This is always difficult, because when a woman claims that she was raped, there, of course, are a number of things that are set in motion, especially on a college campus. But the difference is that oftentimes the way that is pursued on a college campus is different than the way it's pursued in a criminal court of law. And so this is one of the reasons why he wanted to address this issue, and I think does a very good job of really taking on a couple of things that have sort of driven this particular desire to remove a due process from individuals that find themselves on a college campus. And one of those comes from this statistic that is cited all the time. It is the statistic that 1 in 5 women on campus will be sexually assaulted at some time in their college careers. And it then has the other piece that says that virtually no woman would lie or be mistaken in alleging a sexual assault, and that even the absence of evidence is somehow evidence of rape. Now, he takes each one of those on sequentially. The first, he says, is the 1 in 5 statistic is based, he says, on seriously flawed studies that, among other things, improperly define sexual assault or base their findings on low response survey of 2 colleges. And he goes into that in some detail. And then he also takes on the other one, and that is the widely cited study. The author claimed that over 90% of rape claims weren't fabrications. Yet in the author's own research, about 45% of the cases he reviewed did not proceed because there was insufficient evidence, or the complainant withdrew from the process or couldn't identify the perpetrator, or the allegation did not rise to the level of sexual assault. That's a lot of words to simply come back to the frustration of the fact that some women indeed have been raped and they refuse to report it. Other women have been raped and they are mistreated in the criminal justice system. And then you have some individuals that claim rape when it did not take place. And of course, we have all 3 of those examples. And the goal, at least with Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education, is trying to bring back some kind of due process and no longer have what oftentimes has turned into almost a kangaroo court on college campuses today. So again, I wanted you to read this. It's one that is going to require a fair amount of discussion in the future, but because that's becoming an issue in the news, we always like to help you get out in front of some of the conversation that no doubt is going to be taking place over the next couple of weeks. It is a conversation I know that Penna Dexter will probably write a commentary on, since she has really done a lot of research in this area. Might be something we'll talk about as well in our Millennial Roundtable with Chelsea Yeoman. So we'll see how this all goes. But again, I wanted to at least highlight that article that we've posted today, knowing full well that it will be probably a conversation that we will have in the future. Finally, let me encourage you to go to the website today and find out more about our 2 books that we mentioned, Andy Crouch's book, The Tech-Wise Family, and Max Lucado's book, Anxious for Nothing. And my commentary today is about Hurricane Harvey's positive lessons. And I think this would be a real encouragement to you if you don't already receive the commentary in your inbox. Wanted to make it available to you. And certainly you can download this and get the share button, put it on your Facebook page or your Twitter account, or mail it to someone, and they will appreciate that as well. I want to thank everybody who's been a part of the program here today. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Hope you'll join us tomorrow right here on Point of View.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kirby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link. Learn about important issues and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of